This is Aaron Wissner from Local Future, and I'm here on the line with Dr. Steve Keen, economist. He is coming to us live from Thailand. Steve, how are you doing this morning?
Well, it's morning for you, afternoon for me, and of course I'm yawning a bit from a lack of sleep last night. So apart from that, I'm fine. But pardon anybody if I do yawn widely when I'm giving interviews, it's because I'm lack of sleep and too much work.
One of my friends, she is due to pay her mortgage because it's the start of the month, April, and she doesn't have the money. And so, first of all, any tips for her on prioritizing her bills? What should she be paying for first, really? And what's the most important things for her to be focusing on with the little bit of money she has?
Survival. I mean, this is the horrific thing about this virus. People have got no cash flow at all because they've been sacked courtesy of the coronavirus, whether that's because their workplace has been shut down because somebody's got the disease or demand has collapsed for the particular market there. If they're working in airlines, for example, that sort of thing. And in that situation, you're still going to get financial companies saying, please pay our rent, please pay our mortgage. That matters more than your life. No, it doesn't. And the only way to really make these people realize it is if they don't get their money. And so I know this is a radical suggestion, but I suggested in the one of my last blogs on my Patreon page, which, by the way, if anybody wants to check, almost all my posts there are free, even though it's a Patreon site, because my patrons want my ideas to get out there. They don't want them restricted just to the patrons. They are free, so don't get the word Patreon turn you off and checking something out. In it, I argued for a rent strike and a mortgage strike. Just don't pay it. The basic logic there is twofold. First of all, if you've been sacked and you only have enough money to pay the rent or buy food, you've got to buy food. Okay. Otherwise, you're going to starve after you pay the rent, and that's a great option. Secondly, if a massive people do it, if everybody in this situation who gets retrenched, laid off, sent on compulsory holiday, et cetera, if they simply don't pay their rent, what the hell are they going to do? How many millions of claims are they going to face? Overwhelm them with claims. And this really is the only way you're going to get the attention of the financial sector. Otherwise, they'll bleed you dry. So just simply don't pay the rent, don't pay the mortgage. Tell them you're not doing it because you can't afford to. You've got to prioritize staying alive first. You've got to buy food. And that's the first thing you got to do with your money. I know this is not a suggestion that most Americans would take comfortably to, but frankly, in this situation, if you don't do it, if you've only got a cash reserve that'll pay one mortgage payment or a month's food matters more.
So even though the bills are due right now for the mortgage, you have to be looking out until your next money that's coming in, and you have to say, what am I going to need to make it to then, at least?
Yeah, then, I mean, if this was over in a month's time, okay, you could pay the mortgage and scrape through in a month. I think it should be obvious to everybody, this is not going to be over for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. If we're lucky, it might take 6 months. And the economy is collapsing. We saw 3.8 million new people join the unemployment queue last week. The average weekly increase or change is about 200,000, is the most it's been in recent times. So it's almost 20 times as many people joining the unemployment queue. The numbers are going to come out, I think it's Friday, for the next increase. That'll probably be of the same scale, if not larger. This is a huge collapse in demand. And you have to have lockdown. The thing you haven't done so far, you have to have lockdown. You have to have masks for everybody. You have to have isolation. This just doesn't work with a market economy. Forget it. Even no matter whatever your ideology is, a market economy can't survive this sort of process. So if you then have your financial claims on top of that, and people are paying, you've got to pay the mortgage, you've got to pay the rent, you simply can't do it. If you pay it for 1 month, you won't have the money for the month after that, and then they'll chuck you out. Or try to. So the only way to cope is just to say, we're all not going to pay. Rent strike, mortgage strike. And then say, you guys sort it out. And the thing is, this is the important point, government money creation capacity is limitless. And the Federal Reserve has said this on various occasions in terms of rescuing the financial sector. They've said, we have a printing press. Ben Bernanke actually put it that way, printing presses. They don't really print physical money. But if they want to buy $1 trillion worth of bonds off the financial sector, all they do, and they did this for 10 years, is put the number 1 trillion in the bank accounts of the financial sector, and say to the financial sector, please transfer 1 trillion worth of bonds to our accounts. That's all they've got to do. Okay? Now, they did that for the financial sector indefinitely. There's $80 billion a month was the amount of money they were pumping into the financial sector for what they call quantitative easing. So there's no limit to the capacity to do it. They could do exactly the same thing for households. They could say, here's $1 trillion or $2 or $4 trillion a year going into accounts, so we'll pay the mortgage for you. That could be done. And if they won't do it, as long as the public tries to do it themselves out of their savings. But as soon as they do, most Americans haven't got enough money to survive 1 month without income. But you go through it 1 month, you're just delaying by 1 month when you're not going to be able to pay the mortgage anyway. So, but if everybody does it, if you have, let's say, 5 million Americans, and that's not a large fraction of the country, if 5 million Americans, if I'm not going to pay my rent, not going to pay my mortgage, what are they going to try to do? Send out people to evict 5 million people when there's a lockdown? No. This is the time for radical action. Otherwise, the financial sector will bleed you dry.
So yesterday, my friend said, my friend from Wisconsin who is facing, this mortgage bill, she said she called up the mortgage company on the phone and she asked for some help. And they said, well, you don't have to pay this month or next month or even the 3rd month. But then on the 4th month, just pay everything up on that month. Just pay, all four mortgage bills on that month. And then, so she's like, well, that's pointless because I'm going to be so far behind. I'm not going to be able to do it. So I've got to do it now. I've got to try to find a way to squeak by and pay my mortgage because I don't want to be kicked out of my house. I have a long investment in this house and I don't want my credit rating to be ruined because if I don't pay, then they're going to, and maybe I don't know how she has done with her credit rating, but that's a big concern to her. So how do we think about that?
Well, we have to think about it in a way that's completely outside the market economy that we've used to thinking in the past, because you paid your rent because you're being paid a wage, and then 40 or 50% of your wage goes on paying the mortgage, and you continue each week. So some of this coronavirus comes along. It doesn't care about capitalism. It doesn't care about socialism. It doesn't care about fascism, for that matter. It just cares about finding a host somewhere. And the only way we can terminate it is by reducing the level of social contact. And the best way to go about it would be to find some way that everybody can stay in their houses for 8 weeks. Because over a 4 to 8 week period, to identify who's got it and who hasn't, who can afford to go back to work without infecting other people they go to work with, who has to be quarantined, who needs to be treated, etc., etc. That means effectively, for a human body, that's like being put into a coma. Okay? And then you come out of the coma the other side. Now, when you go into a coma, they don't say, oh, by the way, you've got to provide the muscle power to make this ventilator work. You've got to provide the electric power to make this thing pump. The hospital does it for you. In this situation, the government's the hospital. And the fact is that it can do it. The government has the capacity through the combination of the central bank and the treasury to create as much money as is necessary for whatever needs they need. And in the Bank of England's case, for example, and the UK Treasury, which they call the Chancellor over there, Chancellor of the Exchequer, they have agreed that the Chancellor can issue bonds which are bought directly by the Bank of England. So if the Treasury wants to have, let's say, in Britain's case, let's say £1 trillion to send out to people, so then with that £1 trillion, they give them money to pay their mortgage. The Treasury can issue £1 trillion worth of bonds. The Bank of England say, oh, that's great, we'll buy $1 trillion of those off you. Here's $1 trillion in cash for you. We'll take $1 trillion worth of those bonds. And then bang, the Treasury gets $1 trillion that it can put into people's bank accounts through the usual tax repayment system. There's nothing technically impossible about doing that. It's just the political will to do it. Now, if people instead go ahead and struggle and try to pay their mortgages, then the banks will happily take that money and they won't put any pressure on the government to force the government to come to the rescue. And of course, all that does is delay by 1 month, because if your friend pays a mortgage this month, what's she going to do next month? Okay. All she's buying herself is 1 month's freedom from being evicted by the bank. Now, if we have, I hate having to say this because this is not, should not be what individuals have to do. This should be a sensible government decision about using the government's existing powers to create money and put capitalism on, life support, on that intensive care, that induced coma, and provide the flow that keeps it alive for that time. The government could do it. And I know Americans hate hearing that. Okay, it goes against your ideology, but the government has the technical capability to create that much money. The Treasury creates, let's say, $2 trillion worth of bonds. The Federal Reserve buys $2 trillion worth of bonds and credits the Treasury account with $2 trillion. The Treasury then sends $2 trillion out on a per capita basis to American households saying, pay your rent, pay your mortgage with this, and use the money you've actually got for food. And by the way, here's some money for food as well. That could all be done.
So this is, I was trying to make a list. What bills do I have to pay? What bills will I pay? And basically, I was trying to focus on, you need to pay for your food, your child support or your spousal support, ex-spousal support, care homes so they can have food, trash removal, rent to like an individual landlord who you are their only source of funding.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah.
Direct services, like
Sort of,
if you've got a doctor or a dentist or a plumber, because you're paying them directly and that's their food that you're paying them. Obviously meds, energy when they bring the propane or the natural gas or the coal or whatever. And then association fees, like if you're in a condo association and you guys pay for the lawn mowing or the snow removal or trash removal or whatever, you should keep paying that because that's that person's livelihood right there. And on the other hand, things you should stop paying or at least consider delaying as long as possible is any debts to the federal government, taxes, mortgages, car loans, credit card loans, insurances would be like the second tier. So the first one to stop paying would be the mortgages and stuff. Data already being received, like if you already used the thing about like cable and satellite and stuff is it doesn't seem to me that it's really a whole lot of cost on their end. I mean, the whole system's already up. If you're just turning on cable at your house, I mean, what difference does it make whether your box can read the signal versus somebody else's box?
Yeah.
Again, bills to state and local governments, that's one that I kind of put a little bit lower. Oh, well, I skipped this one. Data being transmitted. So like this phone connection right now, I mean, I want this to be preserved. And if the phone companies cut me off, then I'm going to keep paying my bill for this. Although a lot of the phone companies in the US at least have said they won't for late payment. In fact, there won't be a fee or anything for late payment. Bills to state and local governments, the problem in the US, I think, is that state and local governments have no ability to create money on their own. So they they run out. So we kind of have to pay them, otherwise they can't pay anybody else. And then the last one was any retirement investments, like, because I think at this point it's all, I mean, nobody knows what's going to happen. So can you give me some feedback on this, and what do you think? Maybe some things are in the wrong place, or you disagree?
I'd move 5 for renter individuals down, unfortunately, because if most Americans don't have much more money than paying 1 or 2 rent payments. And if you do that and you've got no money left, then I'm sorry, your individual landlord might suffer, but you've got to pay for the food. So I'd push 5 right down. Direct services, you basically, unless you've got something critical happening, like the toilet's exploded, then I wouldn't be doing anything in the way of repairs and so on like that. You're not going to see a dentist because that's a classic way to get coronavirus. Your medical system is an absolute disaster, as people are now realizing, because you lose your health insurance when you lose your job. That doesn't apply in sensible countries like most of Europe, Australia, Canada, the UK. That's just an appalling weakness of the American system in general. So I'd be pushing 5 and 6 down. 5 in terms of, don't pay it if it means you can't buy food for your kids, and 6, just don't do it. You simply can't spend the money in the first place. You need 7. You need energy to keep on. You've got to keep on paying to keep your place warm, particularly if you're in winter, in northern America, and association fees. Of course, in that case, yes, you're right. You've got to move the snow out of the way, and you've got to have the trash taken. And of course, the people picking up the trash are amongst the most exposed to getting the virus. So, you're not going to stop paying the trash guy, because that's an incredibly dangerous job and a vital one at the same time.
And then
yeah.
Go ahead.
Show me the next one. Yeah, definitely debts. Forget about debts to corporations and federal government. That's the first one to go. I agree there. And yes, the retirement investments. I mean, most people who've got is it about a 401k account, you call it over in America? Is that right?
Yeah, there's a number of different designations. There's the 401k, there's 503bs. It really depends if you're public sector or private sector, but
yeah. Well,
IRAs, there's all sorts of different designations.
Yeah. It was, in my opinion, it was insane in the first place to get rid of the pension, which was the case in a lot of cases. The rest of the world, they've replaced pension schemes with things like superannuation schemes that have in Australia, and that means individual people's money is locked up in stock market speculation. Well, quite a few of my friends in Australia have seen their retirement savings fall by 30% because of the fall in the stock market. It was ridiculous to expose people's lifetime retirement security to the volatility of the stock market in the first place. So yeah, just stop throwing money at the finance sector.
And then things like, what about like health insurance, auto insurance, life insurance, home, apartment, dental? I mean, all those types of insurances that a lot of people pay for on a monthly basis.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you're going to, unfortunately, the only people that the politicians listen to these days is the finance sector. And if the finance sector screams, they do something about it. If the finance sector keeps its mouth shut, they don't bother changing the policy. So make the finance sector scream. Stop paying anything to the fire sector. Finance, insurance, and real estate is actually called the fire sector in the national accounts, as it happens. But stop feeding the fire sector. And then they'll scream to the politicians, and then the politicians will do something. And that something is create money to give to you so you can actually pay those bills in the first place. And that's why I say it's like life support. If you're on a coma, you can't breathe for yourself. You've got to have a ventilator to enable you to breathe. Well, this is saying the government has to be the ventilator in this case. It's got infinite capacity to create that ventilator and to turn the money supply to enable individuals to continue paying those mortgages, those insurance costs, et cetera, unless the government's providing the money, stop paying it.
And how about stuff like, your cable box? You have your cable box, so you have internet and you have cable, and all that the companies are really doing is just not blocking it. I mean, that's really what they're doing. They're just not blocking it. Is the only thing they're doing, and you're paying $100 a month for it or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, again, you're going to go stir crazy without some video input. That's the trouble. I mean, you're going to be locked indoors. That's getting closer and closer to happening. So again, that should be a public service at the moment. Again, you can't expect individuals to pay for things like that when they have no wages, and in the case of small businesses, no profits or massive losses. So that's why we've got to see this as a life support situation. It's not about capitalism. It's not about socialism. It's about survival against a biological threat, which we have unfortunately completely ignored the possibility of, even though epidemiologists have been warning this has been coming for over 25 years. We should have built the capacity in. We should have had these systems in place. That hasn't been done. Largely professional economists, the reason why it hasn't been done, they don't even consider the possibility of something like this. It's biologists and epidemiologists say it's inevitable. And we have set our financial system and our economy up as if it's never going to happen. Well, tough shit, it's happened. Pardon me using a rough word. But that is the world we live in. And the government has to stop pretending we live in a world where these things don't happen, because guess what? It has happened.
What about the other item on that list was paying bills to state and local governments, and in particular, I'm thinking about things like need to renew our driver's license, so you have to pay to renew that, tags on the back of the car. And the other one, the other one is, those are to the state governments. And then to the local governments, there are like tax bills, which are used to fund the state, so the state can fund all the teachers and all the public employees in the state. So we get these tax bills if we own real estate 2 times a year in Michigan, at least, like once in the spring and once in the late fall. And for example, in my case, I think, I don't know, it's $2,000 or $3,000 this time of year, and then maybe $1,000 the other time of year. I mean, should we think about that?
Again, don't pay them. Okay, because if you only have enough money to pay kids, okay, put your children on one side of the ledger and the state and federal governments on the other, and the corporations and the landlords. Okay, who do you want to see survive most? Okay, would you be happy to sacrifice your kids? Then pay the rent, pay the mortgage. If you want your kids to stay alive, buy food. And the fact that state governments are constrained in the amount of money they've got is true. But why does it happen? Because the federal government doesn't give them enough money. Okay, there were all this crazy austerity stuff we had shoved down our throats for the last 20 years, pretty much. 40 years, really, if you go back to Reagan and Thatcher.
Austerity meaning what? That's not a word we use in the US.
Yeah. Oh, okay, meaning the government trying to save money, okay? But they think, well, if we save money, we've got it for a rainy day. Well, guess what? This is the rainy day, okay? And it's not just a rainy day, it's a bloody monsoon, okay? It's a tornado. And what they should have been doing, what really is the government saving for rainy day is building hospitals, having stocks of ventilators, having both stocks of and manufacturing capability for masks, having the staff that can run a pandemic management program rather than sacking 80% of them as Trump did 1.5 years ago or thereabouts. Okay? That's the genuine saving. You put aside physical resources. There's no need for the government to save money because it can create money. It's always had the capacity to create as much money as it needs. And this nonsense about saving money, in fact, what it means is when the government says it saves money, which means it takes in more tax revenue than it spends out, that means it's taxing individuals, people, more than it's spending on them, which means their bank account falls. So the amount the government saves, inverted commas, is equal to how much you lose and you just save. The total sum is zero. This is the point which non-orthodox economists like myself have been pointing out for a long, long time, because the mainstream lot, the conventional economists, don't even think in terms of money. This will be a shock to most people who think economists are experts on money, because isn't that what economics is about? No, the mainstream economic theory is dominated by a bunch of religious sects called neoclassical economics, a religious sect which models capitalism as if there's no money in it, as if there's no banks, and as if there's no private debt. Now, there's all three in the real world, and they matter in the real world. And the reason we're having this conversation is because the level of private debt has driven dramatically. It's increased by a factor of 5 compared to incomes since the end of the Second World War. And if we're back in the Second World War, the amount of money you're paying for your rent and your mortgage would be trivial. It wouldn't be, oh dear, if I pay the rent, I can't afford to buy food. If I pay the mortgage, I can't afford to buy food. You'd have a buffer. And the buffers have all been eliminated in the last 40 years by this focus on the government saving money, which means they've been taxing you more than they've been spending on you most of the time, trying to it a lot of the time, thinking that's a good idea. And that means that when this crisis hits, you're the ones who need the cash, but you haven't got it. The government, which can create the cash, is refusing to do so unless it has its arm twisted. And what it should have been doing, putting aside the physical resources that are necessary for a crisis like this, which was warned of by epidemiologists as long as 25 years ago. They haven't done that. So that's why you're in total crisis mode right now.
Now, the thing that some of my college-educated friends are saying is that, oh, well, the government, number one, they can't do it, or they shouldn't do it, or it's going to create hyperinflation. And in fact, there's a fellow in the U.S., his name's Peter Schiff.
Oh, dear old Peter. Yeah, I've heard a few arguments over this over the years. Yeah.
And I follow him not only because he was one of the few who, before 2008, said, hey, we're in this big bubble and it's going to crash,
Yes,
and the
he
market's
did.
going to
He
crash.
did. Yep.
And so since he said that, I kind of follow him because at least he has some sort of a sense of how things work. But his whole take is, oh, it's going to be hyperinflation and we're going to create all this money and everything's going to be all messed up. And so you have to have gold. You have to have gold coins, actual gold coins, because that's real money. And if you don't have gold coins, then you don't really have anything. And, so he has an interest in this, right? So he sells gold or whatever. He has people subscribing to him and listening to him. But how should normal people, how should the everyday person think about this sort of belief that, oh, gold is the only money and that we're going to have hyperinflation? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, look at the hyperinflation we've had since the financial crisis hit. Okay, Peter was one of the few who saw the crisis coming because he saw the huge levels of private debt rising, and there was a factor in his thinking about where the crisis was coming from. But he was predicting inflation, hyperinflation after the crisis. Now, my website, which I no longer maintain, but it's one I set up about 15 years ago, was called debtdeflation.com. Deflation, falling prices. What actually happened after the financial crisis or during the financial crisis? Inflation went from +5% to -2%. And then it turned around at running at pretty much 0 to 1% ever since then. And Peter's been predicting it's going to be massive inflation because the Federal Reserve has been creating so many extra bank reserves for the financial sector. And I've been saying for a long time, that's not what creates money. The reserves are a bit like putting oil into your car and then expecting it to go faster. By oil, I mean engine oil, not petrol. Okay. It'll go faster if it's pointing downhill. Okay, that's about it. So he's mistaking the oil for the petrol, and this is common for what are called Austrian economists. They understand a credit boom, but they don't understand the accumulation of private debt, which is my specialty. And so his call on that front has been wrong, expecting hyperinflation, and also. They think you're going to suddenly change over from fiat money, government-created money, to gold. Well, who wants to do that? How many people have got a stock of gold right now? Okay, you want to go to the grocer. You take, first of all, you haven't got gold to take to them in the first place. Secondly, the idea that gold is money is a myth coming out of the 19th century when there was gold standard between countries. And that was sort of like an international fixed exchange rate system. But that had nothing to do with trade inside countries. People didn't go shopping with lumps of gold.
What about the gold rush and people went and they found gold in California and then they would bring it in and get rich, and because the gold, and they'd even have little bags of gold powder from mining and panning and So isn't gold money though like that? I mean,
no, it's not. Coins gold is an asset you can liquidate for money when you need it. Okay. But as Michael Hudson, I think I put it this way, said, when you think you need gold, you need lead more.
I'm not sure that that's ringing a bell.
Yeah, if you think you need gold, a gun is better. Okay. I hate to say it to Americans because you'd likely use the damn things, but it is when there's a breakdown like this. It isn't when they all see this total breakdown of a fiat money system. That's what they're all waiting for. But frankly, when a crisis like this happens, you want the fiat system to work. It's only breaking down because the people who manage it are university-trained economists who swallow the Kool-Aid that is mainstream economic thinking, which tells them money doesn't matter in the first place. And therefore, they're the ones making decisions about what the Federal Reserve does and so on, that don't understand it and do the wrong thing until they get in panic mode. And then in panic mode, they do things like rescuing the financial sector they did back in 2008. And we need them to panic now to rescue the household sector.
So if the people who are making the decisions on the macro level, like at the Federal Reserves and the central banks and in the governments, don't really understand how money and economics works really, then as individual people, you know, what should be our like one message to them? Like if we had a meme that we put on, like the little picture that we put on Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram or anything, what should it say? I mean, should it say, you know, cancel all debts? Should it say,
yes,
send us all $100 a month or a week, or should it say, give us all debit cards to? I mean, what should we tell them to do if we could speak with like one unified voice?
fund capitalism while it's in meltdown. Okay, the market system can't cope with the virus. Okay, so we have to have the government creating the money to keep capitalism on life support until we've got rid of the virus, and then we can go back to capitalism. So put capitalism on life support. Fund a modern Jubilee. That's what I've called it, a modern Jubilee. The old-fashioned Jubilee was when there was a crisis because there was too much private debt, household debt. The king would write the household debt off, not the corporate debt, the household debt. That was the old-fashioned Jubilee. That began back in ancient Sumeria, as we now know from reading the clay tablets that people like Michael Hudson and Cornelia Winship translated.
So everybody's debts are gone, Steve.
Household debts are free.
Okay, all the mortgage. So the mortgages, the auto loans, the credit card debt.
Yeah.
What about the bills to like the utility companies? Those too, or are those still there?
No, at the moment, like for the next 8 weeks, if you wanted to have a sensible policy to get rid of this virus, you'd find a way that everybody can pay all their financial needs for 8 weeks, and everybody gets food, and everybody is isolated in their immediate family groups, so we don't have mixing of the virus. That's what we need to achieve. So forget everything that you think about the ideology of capitalism, whether you're a communist or a socialist or a right-wing libertarian, doesn't matter. Forget about all that stuff, because the virus couldn't care whether you're evangelical, Republican, Democrat, socialist, capitalist, it doesn't give a damn. You're just a host as far as it's concerned. Okay? So we have to think in its terms. And its terms are, I want this person to interact with that person so I can transfer from their body to that body, and I can reproduce myself and go on and get, the virus can continue spreading. We have to stop that. Now, if we stop it, then the financial system, which we happen to call capitalism, also stops. And then we have social breakdown. Now, is that a necessity? The answer is no, because we have another way to create money, which is the government can simply create the money and inject it into private bank accounts. And we can do that, and that will mean people don't have to pay them. They don't have to pay the mortgage out of their saving because the government's giving them money for 8 weeks while the whole place is shut down. We do it for an 8-week period, and it's all over. We could, if we really did it really strictly, in 8 weeks, we could get rid of this virus. Okay? So it's feasible. Now, if we don't do it, we'll be putting up for 6 months or a year or 1.5 years, and heaven knows what's going to come out of that. We're going to have an incredible peak, and do you see how many deaths you're getting in the United States already? Add to those deaths if people were pushed out because they couldn't pay their rent or their mortgages, the social breakdown that goes with that. We could prevent it by simply saying for 8 weeks, we're freezing the financial system, we're letting the government provide the money to keep that working, we're just staying alive and staying isolated, and then we can bring the virus under control. That's what we need to do, first and foremost. Forget any ideology you have, whether you're left-wing or right-wing, a Democrat, Republican, just find a way to keep the financial sector alive without me letting you drive money.
And when you're saying the financial sector, you're just saying that our credit cards and debit cards continue to work and being accepted. I mean, that's really what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, this is going to be a bit of an ugly graph to look at, pardon me, but I just want to, while we just give me a second here to put a chart up, because I want to show some levels here that people aren't probably aware of. And I'm just going to whack this on a very large screen. Sure. It's a badly formatted chart, but it'll give you the idea here.
Sorry.
So just, okay, let's get inside here. Because I've specialised in looking at the level of private debt in America and the impact it has on the economy. And as I said, mainstream economists completely ignore the data I'm going to show people here. It's going to look pretty hard to look at, but let's just give it a try anyway. So I'm going to go across here and try sharing the screen. And I'm going to share this image here, okay? Now, the red line there is the level of private debt in America. That's zero, private. So there's the zero line here. The red line is the level of private debt. Now, that you can see the private debt back in the 1930s, this level here is the level of private debt back in 1932.
Hey, Steve, when you're
Yep.
when you're talking about private debt and you're looking at that low point on the red line, the lowest point there, what do you mean by private debt? I mean, do I have private debt?
Yeah.
Do my friends?
Money,
I mean, what does that look like?
Money you owe to the banks. Money you owe to banks.
So mortgages,
Okay?
car payments, credit card payments,
credit card payments, corporate debt as well. This is adding together both household debt and corporate debt. And this has been what's driven American capitalism all the way through its entire history. And mainstream economics completely ignores this information. This is what I've been working on this for going on 35 years now. And it's completely ignored by the mainstream, but they don't think debt plays any role in the economy. They completely ignore it. Now, what I do is say, well, debt's actually essential because you spend with credit. Okay, your money you borrow and spend is part of the total demand in the economy. And if you pay your debt down, you're actually taking money out of the economy, so demand falls. This is a badly formatted chart. We might come back to it, maybe take a bit of a break, and I'll come back to it with better formatted. But I've put this data set together using Federal Reserve and census data. And you can see there have been three major peaks in the level of private debt over time. Okay, we're now at the highest. The 2008 crisis was the biggest level of private debt in the history of capitalism, American capitalism, and we've fallen down to about here. What you can see here, the black line is the unemployment rate, and notice the unemployment rate goes up when the blue line goes down. What's the blue line? That is the annual change in private debt. That's credit, and when credit goes down, unemployment goes up. And we've got ourselves so dependent upon credit that credit's what's driving the economy. But when you rely upon credit, which is change in debt, your debt gets bigger and bigger all the time. And you're now carrying this enormous debt burden, bigger than America's ever covered. And that's why the financial sector is so dangerous right now. If I go back to when the Spanish flu occurred, that was back here, 1918. That's when the Spanish flu hit. So that level, back then, the level of private debt was about 1/3 what it is here. So the Spanish flu killed a lot of people, broke the economy to some degree, not as badly as we're breaking right now, but forced people into isolation and so on to get over it. But the financial burden was relatively small compared to where we are up here. So I would like to get us back to this situation, very low level of private debt. And then we wouldn't have to have this conversation because rent wouldn't be a totally dominant part of your spending. Mortgages wouldn't be a totally dominant part of your spending. It's allowing this growth. That's the end of the Second World War, and that's now. Well, that's 2000. That's the crisis. That's now. That huge increase in debt is what meant the financial sector is such a scary beast for us today. And I've been wanting for a decade. Been arguing for a decade, we have to reduce this level back to a sustainable level, like back around here or thereabouts, about 70% of GDP, what it was in the 50s and 60s, get it back to that level. We should never let it get this high. But we've let it get this high, and therefore it's the scariest thing we face. What if I don't pay the mortgage? Well, letting the financial sector push us into this much mortgage debt is what's caused the problem in the first place. We've got to push back against them. And if we don't in this crisis, then you're going to have enough money to pay 1 month's mortgage, and then you're going to be unable to pay the next month after that. You won't have any money for food either. That's an awful situation. If people stop paying their mortgages now, then at least you have 1 month of food, and in that 1 month when the financial sector is not being paid, it's mortgage servicing payments, they're going to be screaming to the federal government, do something. And unfortunately, that's what the federal government's going to listen to, the finance sector, not the people.
So let me kind of see if I can put this in more layman's terms, so to speak. So the issue is that people have so much debt that they owe in the future. Like if they were to pay everything off, I mean, there's just so much, because people will have like mortgages and they owe, let's say, 100,000 US for the mortgage, and then they have another 10,000 in auto and another 5,000 in credit card. So you've got like 115,000 in debt. And let's say that's, I know that's not the average. Some people can't possibly get that high, but say that's just the average in the US. And so there's so much debt that there's a problem with a lot of our income is going to service this debt, like paying the bills. And because so much of that money is going to pay that's really putting a drag on the economy, and it's a lot more than it's ever been before.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it.
Okay. So the couple of ways of getting out of that, I guess, would be, one way would be that everybody stops paying their rents and mortgages, and then we just do a restart on that. But the debts are just eliminated, so that's the debt jubilee idea, like the emperors used to do when they came to power. And then the other idea would be that we just go back to what we were doing in 2010, and we just tried to start paying the bills, even though we weren't, we didn't have that much income. But I mean, what are the different scenarios here? I mean, A, B, C, one of these is most likely to happen. I mean, these are the three ways it could go. Or
well, unfortunately, the likely way it's going to go is people are going to continue trying to pay their rent and mortgage because they're terrified of being thrown out of their houses. They'll pay it, and because they've got any wage income coming in, 1 month later they won't be able to pay it. They won't have any money for food. They'll have much less money for food in the month they pay their mortgage payments than they would otherwise have had. And when the next month comes around and they hope it's all fixed up, they'll be having no money for food and no money to pay the mortgage. And all they do is buy themselves one more month, and we're still in the middle of a virus crisis. And the last thing anybody wants to have happen right now is for people to be thrown on the streets. Because you're thrown on the street, you're more likely to get the virus, you're more likely to transmit the virus. So we have to find a way to isolate. And the way to isolate is to be able to get, I think the National Guard should be delivering food to people's houses. Something as extreme as that. You set up a national distribution system so you don't have to go and congregate to get food. You get it distributed to you through something like the National Guard or the Army.
Well, that sounds like an idea I pitched. I went to our local post office 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And I talked to the postmaster, and I said, hey, listen, you guys know where all the houses are. You have all the addresses. You have the trucks and everything. How about we find out who needs food. They call us. They tell us their address, how many people are living there. We package it up like 3 days or a week or whatever. We bring it to you. The address is right on it. And all you have to do is drop it off, because you guys go around every single day anyway. And or we could follow you in the truck because you know the routes, the most efficient routes, and then we'll just drop the boxes off as we go. And I thought that was a reasonable idea. And he said, after checking with it, well, the U.S. Postal Service is not set up to do that. According to their rules and regulations, everything has to be stamped and properly paid for to mail. And in fact, we couldn't even, the other thing I asked him is, hey, we've got, there's people who've got masks and gloves at home they just got because they've been stocking up, but the hospitals in some places in the US really need these. Could we just have like a box? And since the post office is open like from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, couldn't we just bring in and put the stuff in the box? And then you take the box, because we don't want to be driving all the way to the big cities. We're in the country where I'm at. You just take the box to the hospital. Just take the box there, because you go in there anyway. I mean, you got to deliver all over the place. And he said, well, he asked his uppers, and they said, well, no, we can't do that because it doesn't have, we wouldn't know where to take it, and it's not stamped and stuff like that. But that seems like a practical, I mean, we've already got the system in place.
You've got a system for distribution. You just require to be financed by money paid by individuals. at the moment. And if you don't have, I mean, you want to minimize people getting collectively together. You don't want a whole lot of people going to supermarkets. For example, in countries like the UK now, where they are doing a complete lockdown, they don't allow gatherings of more than 2 people in public. And when a person goes out of a house, they only want one person to leave the house and go to a supermarket. That is actually more dangerous than having a postal worker or a member of the National Guard in a hazmat suit going around with a truck, leaving parcels of food at people's front doors. Okay, if you want to minimize the amount of danger, then you want to minimize the amount of contact. And you have a system to do it. You don't have enough masks for everybody in America. By the way, in Thailand, where I am right now, you have to queue up to get them. Everybody in the queue has a mask, but the government is forcing companies to sell masks to the public for 10 cents a mask, 4 masks per day. And they make the firms are making a 2-cent profit on each mask, I might add. They're not losing money doing it. So in Thailand, every person can queue up and get 4 masks per day. And that's meaning that we have, that particular prevention system is there. Thailand has the capacity to produce this stuff. America does not. It's a sign of how badly managed your economy has been that you're in this situation. So what you need is to use the system that gives you the minimum possible human contact for the duration that is necessary of a lockdown, that the virus can die out, not be transmitted to new people, and just be focused upon those who've currently got it and their immediate family members or house residents. And then they can be isolated, they can be quarantined. Maybe 80% of the workforce can go back to work without the virus. We isolate the 20% or so who've caught it, which is quite feasible. And then in that group, you reduce your load by a factor of 5 over what it could be if you don't do something like this. And then that's forget about ideology here. It's simply practicality. What's the most practical way of enabling people to stay alive for sufficient time that the virus is isolated amongst those who have it, not transmitted to new people, and can then die out?
Can I show you something real quick?
Yeah, sure.
So this is a couple days ago, and this is showing a food bank distribution in, I think, Pennsylvania. Yeah, Pennsylvania. And so they said, if you need food, come on in, we'll give you a box of food. And so there's all these cars queued up to get this food. And on the nightly news last night, I saw something similar happening in New Mexico or something. So you're saying if the government, via the National Guard or whatever workers, if they were just to drop boxes off at our houses, everybody's house, based on how many people were living there, that would be a much better way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, look at how many cars are lined up and queued there. That's a crazy way to do it because people are sitting there in a traffic jam. There's a truck could replace at least 100 of those cars. And a truck going the opposite direction with 3 people in it versus those cars with 100 people in it. It's far faster to have one truck going past 100 homes than having 100 people hopping into their cars and be caught in a traffic jam like that. Okay, you don't want to run out of fuel that quickly. So that is just a crazy way to go about it. You want to have, you go in the opposite direction. Have a truck going around all those addresses, dropping the food off. You would get rid of all those cars at least the one thing I'll say in favor, at least this is one time that cars are better than public transport, because public transport spreads the disease more effectively than cars do. Okay, so that's a positive. Okay, but it's be more effective to have a truck go in the opposite direction, equally not spreading the disease, having one person in a hazmat suit or 2 people in a hazmat suit hopping out and putting food in either side of people's houses versus 100 cars going in the opposite direction, which makes more sense.
So this is making me think that, I mean, our National Guard in the US is not that many people, really. I mean, it doesn't seem to be. When they're talking about deploying National Guard to Michigan, which has 10 million people, they're talking about deploying 100 National Guard members to Michigan, or calling up 100. And that's, I mean, yeah, they can help in some small, they can help at a food bank which is what was showing on the news yesterday,
Yeah,
that they were helping, making sure that, oh, come on in, you know, and they were, you know, giving them the box and they were checking them off or stamping their hand or something so they didn't get back in the queue. But it would seem to me like for at each post office, for every person that works on delivery, so I think we have 7 routes in our rural community, you would probably need 2 more people to be doing the delivery. So that's kind of the number. That's kind of the number of people, and we would have to volunteer really. In each community, we would need to say, you know, I'm at home, I'm not doing anything this morning, so I can do the delivery and I can put on the suit, and it's not like putting on a suit's complicated. I mean, you got to know how. Well,
it is complicated, but the post office is a good idea because you do have the staff that do a delivery once a day. Okay, so technically speaking, it's feasible for the post office to deliver 1 parcel per household per day. They've got the staff that could do that. So that would be often, you know, in countries I've lived in, there's often people on motorbikes rather than trucks. So you've got various, you know, logistic issues like that. But it makes more sense to distribute food to the people in houses than have people leave the houses and come to a central distribution point. Okay, it's less likely to send the disease that way. Again, I'm not an expert on logistics. This is my opinion here, but I think that would be more effective. And it's those sorts of decisions that need to be made about how you manage to enable people to remain isolated, so it can identify those that have the virus and that they don't transmit it to those who don't have the virus. And that way, you can bring capitalism out of deep freeze much faster. If you let it be the sort of waffle around type stuff that has been allowed for so long in America under this crisis, then you're going to spread the disease more. It's going to take longer. So the thing which matters to a virus is it survives in a host. When it's outside the host, it's not alive. Okay, it's a classic vampire or the zombie. Okay, it's only alive when it gets inside a host. So if you can set it up so that it doesn't get a chance to go from one host to another, except in a particular group of people who are living together, then you can stop it getting from one family to another family and leave those families that are, once you've identified the people who don't have it and don't have it in their family, they can go back to work.
So it sounds like we need to have testing per household then.
Well, you should have testing of the whole country. The fact you don't have the capability again.
I mean, door-to-door testing is what we're talking about. We need to have someone going door-to-door and doing testing door-to-door.
Even without door-to-door testing. I mean, door-to-door testing would work. If people stayed inside their homes, then the test kits you have could go, you know, one house to another and slowly test everybody. But equally, if you leave people in the house for 2 weeks and nobody comes down with the disease in that 2-week period, you know nobody's got it. So it's a primitive way to do it, make up for the absence of test systems right now.
Sure. Can I show you another thing regarding food?
Yep.
Okay. So this is something, I don't know if you're familiar with a website called Hedge.
Oh yeah. They reproduce my stuff every now and then. Yep.
So
some conspiracy theories, some good stuff, yeah.
Yeah, that's how I read them too. Like some of the stuff you're like, well, maybe not. But this guy's point, Michael Snyder, and a few of the commentaries were saying that, you know, he's always claiming that the food distribution system is going to break down. But his point was that restaurants provide like a quarter of the food that people eat in the US. I don't know what the percentage was, but it was like some large portion. And given the fact that people that have money are buying more than they would normally buy, and the fact that nobody is buying at restaurants anymore, at least a very, very small amount, that this is putting a huge strain on the grocery stores first, and then the distribution warehouses second, and then the farmers are also being strained because the market prices, since they sell stuff on the market, the prices for like corn and soy and stuff have just dropped. And so now they're not able to pay their mortgages and their tractor payments and all these things like this. So what sort of observations or thoughts do you have on whether there's any well-founded concerns, and if there are any, what ought to be done by individuals and by governments.
Well, I think this is where you've got to decide what is an essential service, and probably one of the most, part of it disappeared from the screen there. One of the most essential services is obviously food. You've got to get food to people so they can stay alive. Just like the virus needs humans, needs a human host to stay alive, we need food to stay alive. So you've got to get food to people. So in that sense, food and distribution of food are essential services. But is the way we're doing it right now effective in the case of a virus like this? And the answer is largely no, because you don't want people congregating in supermarkets. So one of the stories we've had emphasised in this is to minimise how many people go out from a house to go shopping, shop as rarely as possible, buy in bulk. But then what you have is people panic buying and buying more food than they need, or stocking up on 2 months worth of food, which is a sensible thing to do if you don't have a systemic response to it. The systemic response is to say, okay, the farms are vital, so we have to go and test everybody who works in a farm. Those with somebody who's got a disease, they've got the disease in the farm, they've got to go back to their homes for a while. Pardon me, something's happening in my house outside. I better check in a moment. You set up so the house itself, the farm itself can still function, produce the food, goes to a supermarket, which then has the postal service picking up the pre-produced food put together in a factory and sends it out to people to keep them alive for the 4 to 8 week period necessary to isolate us all and stop the growth in the virus. Something of that nature is necessary.
Is anyone, there's 200 countries or whatever, is anybody getting even close to that? Anything like that?
There's something like happening with the UK. That the UK is going in that direction. They don't let if you're outside the house without a good reason, then you can get fined. Ditto for Australia as it happens.
So we just talked about the food supply and the farms, and so what should be done regarding from farm to home? How should that be made efficient so that we can get through this crisis?
You use some sort of system you have, and the Postal Service is a good suggestion, along with the postal workers get hazmat suits, so that they can distribute the food on a house-by-house basis, so people get enough food to be able to self-isolate and and trap the virus in the houses which it exists, not let it spread to houses where it doesn't exist.
Great. And so for the farmers should not have to pay any of their debts, so they can continue doing their work, and they should get support from the federal government as well, then directly.
Yeah, fundamentally, the government provides the cash flow that would otherwise be created by the market system, because at the moment the market system can't create the cash flow.
Okay. So in summary from this whole conversation, for people who are watching, I think it's number one, focus on food and making sure you have food. Number two, making sure you stay home so that the virus doesn't have a way to get anywhere. And number three, if there's any lobbying or anything like that to be done with government officials, tell them that they need to be providing the food directly to people and to be excusing mortgages, and nobody has to pay any of that stuff. Just focus on paying food. And if you want us to pay the mortgages, then send us a check that says this is for your mortgage. Something like that.
But money straight to if you get tax refunds, then they've got to wait for any money directly into your bank account. To get the government to create the money to put in your bank account so you can pay all those services, pay the mortgages, pay the rent, and nothing financially breaks down on top of the breakdown of the productive system we're already seeing. And focus production fundamentally on food.
And then as far as direct payments from the government to our bank accounts, should that be like $300 a week or something? Should it be like
enough to pay the average mortgage or the average rent, whatever that might be in each state?
Okay, but pretty regular. Not just like this one-time thing.
Yeah, you don't want individuals to be unable to pay the mortgage and potentially face eviction. You don't want the banks to go effectively bankrupt because the collapse in the value of assets at the same time. So you've got to find a way to put the system in deep freeze. And the government has the capability to create that money for about an 8-week period. So it's 8 weeks of a centralized system because, again, as I said, the virus couldn't give a stuff whether you're a capitalist or a socialist or whatever system. It just wants to find hosts to invade, to inhabit and pass on to the next host. We have to think in the same way. How do we minimize that? Okay. It wants us to maximize it. We have to minimize it. And the market system has no capability of minimizing it. In fact, it maximizes exposure.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve. Is there anything else that you think people know in general before we say farewell?
Well, just mainly that we need to reform the financial system as well after this, and we can't go back to the same approaches we had beforehand. Things like a universal basic income and universal health are essential. You can't have these things privatized completely. Because when you do, they only work when the environment is good. Well, the environment's not good. So it's time we woke up to that. And this is part of the whole, we've put too much of a load on the planet. This is the planet getting even. If we don't wake up on this, then something else is going to come along and give us a, maybe not as painful a slap in the face, but just it's a similar, smashing us for putting too much of a human load on the planet.
All right. Thank you so much for all your time today, Steve. So again, that was a call with Steve Keen. Steve is one of the world's top economists. Like he's a whole level above any other economist you've probably ever heard of. And he has a very astute understanding of what ought to be done and why the financial issues happened in the first time, and also how to address the virus. And if you found this interesting, helpful, educational, useful, if you'd like me to get Steve or other people who have deep insights into these sorts of matters on the line again, please like and subscribe and hit the little bell so you get the notifications, and make a comment and share this. And if not for this particular video, then search up Steve Keen on the internet, on Google, in YouTube, and try to learn as much as you can about this. I love his suggestions. The suggestion to have food distribution to homes, great idea. To not just do a strike. We're striking. We're not paying any mortgages. We're not paying any taxes. We're not paying any rents and car payments and credit card bills. We're not paying any of that. We're just focusing on making sure our families are safe and secure and have the food they need, and that they have the meds they need, and that we're supporting those those people who we actually support directly, like the people that actually come and do work for us individually, and we're paying them money so that they can buy their own food. We have to support them as well. I mean, we can't ignore them because they're part of this. So thank you so much for joining with us today, and good luck to you. Hello, this is Aaron Wissner from Local Future. Today we will be talking with Steve Keen, economist and deep thinker. He is the world's top #1 economist. He has more insight into how money works, how debt works, and how the economy works than anyone else on the planet. So he is a person worth listening to. Now, how do we know that he is a person who knows this stuff? Well, remember back in 2007, 2008, when there was that huge economic crash and recession, and the housing prices went way down, especially in the US, and the unemployment rate went way up. Steve had written a book about this happening a couple of years before it happened, because the way he understands the economy is the much big picture than anybody else. It's kind of like back historically when people used to believe that the earth was flat and that the sun and the moon went around the earth. and that was called the geocentric model of the universe. And it worked. I mean, it looked like it works. I mean, most of the time, until you see like a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse, or you look out at Jupiter and you see there's little moons spinning around it, and then you're like, well, something's not right here. Well, that geocentric view of the universe, that's the view that practically every other economist has. And those are the economists who are talking with our politicians and convincing them to do things that don't actually solve the problems a lot of times. Whereas here's Steve Keen, who understands that, hey, this is not how it works. The Earth is not the center of the universe, and it's actually very, very different. And so he has a very deep insight. So please enjoy this video. And before you do, if you appreciate content creators like myself and Steve on the internet, then if you could please like and subscribe and hit the little bell so you get notifications, share a comment, share some insight, share a question, and do that now, because I know we're all busy right now. We've got some crazy things on our to-do lists. So do that now, and let's begin and have a listen to my talk with Dr. Steve Keen.